come and get it.
Don't come and get it.
Get him in, get him in, get him in. On the floating worm.
I'm John Hawthorne.
I'm Steve Horvath.
We're with Delaware Valley Outdoors. We're here at Lake Towhee trying to catch some post-spawn largemouth bass. And I'd say that constitutes a post-spawner.
That's it. Hey,
Looking
hang
good.
on. It's going to be a good one. John, this is the first time on Lake Towhee for me.
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen you that we did shows as Delaware Valley Outdoors on it, but I've never been here. Give me the info on this lake that I need to know to come here.
Sure. First of all, Lake Towhee, we're in Bucks County, Pennsylvania.
Right.
We're in kind of like north central of Bucks County. You know, Doylestown's kind of in like the center of Bucks County. We're about 15, maybe 18 miles north of Doylestown. The big lake that everyone knows of around here, of course, is Nockamixon. That's the biggest lake in this part of the county, and we're just about 3 or 4 miles north of Nockamixon. If you look at a map of Nockamixon, or look at a map of Bucks County and find Nockamixon, look just a little bit north, and you will see it.
Now, this isn't a big lake at all.
No,
I mean, this is
very,
barely
very
a lake.
small. Yeah, I think the whole park is only like 500 yards. The lake, or 500 acres. The lake is like under 100 acres. And as far as fishable acres, it's probably only about 50 fishable acres, because, you know, those are folks who know or are familiar with this lake. Half of it is just completely, you know, it's super shallow with stumps and lily pads, and this time of year the weeds just fill it in. You just can't fish it. It's physically unable to get to it. But
I got some weeds right now.
yeah.
So tell me about what a person can expect, especially this time of year if they come up here, in the way of what are they going to find in the way of weed growth, you know, aquatic vegetation, lily pads, stuff like that.
Well, we're in the middle of May now, and of course we've got a very warm spring, so the weeds are up. Lily pads are already up. These little pads are up. You know, the coontail, moss, you know, various forms of hydrilla. It's all up. And you are going to be fishing weeds.
Right.
If you're going to be fishing this lake, you have got to be prepared to be fishing weeds. You're really not going to be able to throw much as far as anything with a treble hook. You might be able to throw some form of like a topwater bait with the treble hook, but mostly you're going to be fishing like Texas rigs, plastics. You're going to be fishing spinner baits. The most of the people are here, they're fishing for largemouth bass.
Right.
And there are no smallmouth in here. It's way too shallow. The water's way too warm. One of the nice kind of bonus species in here is pickerel. There's usually, you're going to catch a couple of pickerel when you're in here. They're usually pretty aggressive. But the other thing you're not going to find here is big bass boats.
Right.
I mean, for us to launch this boat here, I mean, they kind of have a ramp,
Right.
but it certainly isn't what you would think of as a typical boat ramp. Like, you wouldn't be able to launch your boat here.
Right.
It's just too big and not deep enough.
But if somebody has a small car topper,
Perfect.
maybe a kayak, it looks
Kayak.
like a great lake for a
A
kayak.
canoe or one of those little paddle boats or something, it's just a great lake for that, because there aren't going to be jet skis, there aren't going to be people water skiing. You're not allowed to fire up the gas engine here. It's electric only.
Right.
Which really keeps the boat traffic down to a minimum. There's, I mean, what, have we seen one boat today?
Right.
And so it just doesn't get the attention. We are amazed at how many people that live in Bucks County that don't even know about it.
Right.
And some people, you know, who fish who don't know about it, because you go out and you buy a brand new boat, you want to fire it up, you want to take it to
Sure.
Nockamixon or take it to the river or go up to Beltsville or something like that. But a lot of guys just aren't even aware that a small lake like this is here.
Now, there's a good amount of grass here now. Tell me a little bit about...
You noticed, did you?
Yeah, exactly. Tell me a little bit about the stages of the grass, because you can come here in April and there
Right.
might be a lily pad sticking out somewhere around the shoreline.
Sure.
But there's really not a whole lot here. So kind of talk me through the year here and how you know, you would go through looking for fish and how the grass grows up and
Right.
stuff like that.
The nice thing about this lake is the size of it. You can get around and cover the entire lake really in an afternoon, kind
Right.
of like we're doing, and you can be fairly confident that you're putting your bait in front of some fish, just because you've moved around a lot. Depending on the winter we've had, I've been known to start fishing here, you know, as early as March. And when you get here, it's completely different. There are no weeds, there are no lily pads. You have access to a good portion of the lake where you can actually start to see, you know, the stumps, and you can begin to really throw about anything you want. We can throw jerk baits at that time of year. The water's usually got a little bit of a stain to it, so spinner baits are big. And you know, you can always still be pitching jigs and things, you know, to stumps, which there are plenty of. So that's kind of where you're going to start. As the lily pads begin to grow is really when it's the great time to be here. My favorite month to be here would be April.
Right when the pads are starting to pop out of the water.
They're just beginning to come up, and you can still fish over them. You know, all the weed growth has begun. The fish are starting to come up and want to get shallow. That's the great time to be here.
Mad dog spinnerbait bite.
Yeah, and that's when Bobby, you know, loves to get here,
Right.
because he loves to chunk and wind his spinnerbaits. You know, but just about anything that you want to throw, you can catch them on then, because the fish are very active, you know, very aggressive, willing to bite. Spinnerbait is always good because you usually get a little bit of stain to the water, but you know, a crankbait. You know, we catch a lot still on like plastics, a floating worm, a Texas rig worm, that type of a thing. Once you get like into May, which is where we're at now, the spawn is kind of over. You know, fish are a little bit more lethargic. You're going to struggle a little bit, kind of like we have today, for some bites.
But the bites we've had have been nice ones.
Been good quality. That's the thing. This is a big bass lake, which is, you know, 15-inch minimum.
Good to know.
Good to know. If you want to keep some fish, come and fish for crappies. You know, there's plenty of crappies in here as well. But so 4 fish, 15 inches, but they get big in here. Steve, it's you can come here and catch some 12 inchers, but you can also catch them 5 and 6 pounds here.
Right.
The quality of fish is here. And so, I mean, I've been fishing this since I was a kid, because it's pretty much in my backyard. With, you know, me and my dad in a rowboat, we're out here. This is the first place, you know, we ever came to fish with a boat. And so it's just perfect for that type of just casual angler. They can come here, put a kayak, put a canoe in, paddle around for a couple hours, and still have a reasonable chance of catching a quality fish.
Now, this is not a deep water structure lake.
Oh,
this
no.
is the type of lake where you see the pads, you see the grass,
Right.
you see all the stuff. So it's
Yeah.
very visual. You don't need the depth finders, the full-blown
No.
bass boat.
In fact,
You can
I leave
come
my
out and
depth
catch-
finders turned off most of the
Exactly.
time, because
Yep.
you know, what you see is what you get. You know, you talk about, you know, in the DVO video as far as structure versus cover. We have tons of cover here. There's very, very little structure because, you know, it has really become silted in. This
Right.
lake
And you
was
you would pretty much classify the lake as a bowl type of lake.
Yeah, for the most part. It's a little bit deeper way down at the lower end where there's a dam. There's some water there that might be 9 feet deep, maybe.
Okay. On a good day.
On a good day with right after a rainstorm. But the average depth of this lake here is probably no more than 4 or 5 foot deep. So it's a shallow water fisherman's dream. If you like fishing shallow grass, if you like throwing, you know, weedless plastics, if you like throwing spinner baits and buzz baits, you're going to love it here. Because you know, when the bite is good, you know, they are on, and you can really still catch some very nice fish. I think a lot of people think a small lake like this, you know, you're going to be catching small fish, and there are good numbers of small fish in here. But with all the cover that's here, there are good numbers of really big fish.
Right.
They can just be a little bit difficult to get at, and you know, Bob and I have always talked. You know, I throw spinner rods a lot, but you know, you really, if you are targeting big fish, you ought to be prepared to be throwing like bait casting equipment, like you're throwing, with, you know, 12 or 14 pound test. Because if one of these 4 or 5 pounders gets in those pads,
I got to take this 25 off.
you'll have no problem. We will get them in with that. But you know, if you come out here with a spinning rod and you don't know what you're doing or you don't have a boat to chase after, I mean, you could, I mean, I've gotten broke off here before.
Oh, sure.
It happens.
Yep.
But there are some good quality fish, and certainly with all the pickerel here as well. Plenty of toothy guys here.
So we talked about spring and summer. How is this lake in the fall?
You know, it's until the weed growth really begins to die back.
Now, I know this isn't a fair question to ask you because you're bow hunting.
Right, I am usually bow hunting.
But
I mean,
this has got to be a good lake as soon as the grass starts to...
June, July, August, and the early part of September, basically all the same. It's still very hot. The weeds are all the way up. Access is difficult. You're going to come out here and you're going to think that there should be a fish everywhere. But really, most of the fish have, you know, gotten under the cover. Those are going to be the months where, like the first hour or two of the morning, the last hour or two at night, and get the heck out of here, you know, in the middle of the day. You know, we were talking that the first show I ever fished, you know, with Bob, with DVO, was here, you know, 10 years ago or so. And that was like the end of July. And by the end of the day, I mean, it was miserable. It was nasty hot, but we were here first thing in the morning and we caught some good fish. Now, once it gets to the fall, and now once your weeds start dying back and give you some more access, again, the lake's empty.
Right.
Nobody's here because most everybody's bow hunting. So I think it's another great time where it's going to give you accessibility to some of the water that you haven't had since, you know, March or April.
And I got to tell you, it's a pretty lake.
Oh, very, very nice. And you said, I mean, we've seen deer on the side. We keep seeing blue herons everywhere.
Some wood ducks,
wood
geese.
Ducks, and very aggressive frogs.
The frogs here are some of the most aggressive frogs I've ever seen.
We've had to yank baits away from frogs that are chasing them. I mean, if this was a frog show, we probably would have limited out by now.
At least we'd have enough legs for dinner.
Yeah, we'd be ready to eat.
Yeah.
So
well, I think we're going to get back to some fishing here. And we'll see what we can come up with because it's getting right.
It is. Sun's getting down. Shadows are getting long. I think we ought to get a few more. Damn, I knew that was a good fish.
In the boat, fish.
Got him? All right.
Woo!
Way to go, Captain Steve.
Man, that's a Lake Towhee bass.
That's awesome.
Ooh. Let's spin the boat around a little bit here, John.
Oof, sorry, get a little discombobulated here.
Ooh. Mean fish. Came out after your buzzbait.
Yep.
And we are grassed up, but that's a big part of catching these fish. Let's get us all. Whoo! He had this worm.
That's
now, the thing that nobody got to see actually was this fish came out after your buzzbait.
Right, we got to the side of the lake here where there was just a little bit of shade, and I like throwing a buzzbait as much as anything, so decided to just throw it and saw a wake come out, and I was actually getting ready to wind that thing back in, and as soon as I sped it up, he hit it, but I didn't hook him.
Yep, let's get this guy back, and we're going to talk a little bit about what happened, because that's a great tip for people.
Right.
You're fishing a topwater lure, a buzzbait. Fish comes out after it. The last thing you want to do is throw another buzzbait to it.
Right.
So what I did was I threw into the same area you were in. I threw a soft plastic in, something that goes in slow and quiet. Just picked up on the rod and the fish was already on it.
And the important thing is we've got other rods ready to go. It's not like we've got to dig or tie something on. We've got other rods ready to throw in there for a backup at a moment's notice, because if you can't get to that fish within seconds, that fish could be gone.
Yep. So it's a great tip. Have a backup rod ready, something completely opposite of what you're fishing. You'll catch a lot more fish. I think we're ready to start fishing again.
I think we're ready to get going.
Yep.
Awesome. Good job, Stevie.
And now for a closer look at today's tackle, Delaware Valley Outdoors presents the Tackle Box. For more information about the tackle used on today's show, go to DelawareValleyOutdoors.com.
Well, John, it's getting to be that time for the tackle box. Got a lot of stuff that we used today. Not all of it did we catch fish on, but it's all excellent stuff for fishing shallow, weedy stuff. So let's start with the buzzbait.
Always one of my favorites. If they can be caught on the buzz, I would like to throw them on the buzz because it's a lot of fun.
Right. Now we used two different size buzz baits. We used this bigger 1/4 ounce and little teeny 1/8 ounce buzz
it's an
bait.
1/8 ounce. I like throwing buzz baits on a spinning rod. I feel like I've got more control over it, and I think I get more bites with a smaller bait. You run the risk maybe of breaking off if you catch a bigger fish, but that's going to be the trade-off. You know, how comfortable you are. A lot of people aren't comfortable throwing bait casters, so I like to throw just a little one. I think I get just a little bit more bites on it.
Right. Now, two things about the buzz bait. Number one, I usually fish a trailer hook on them, but today with all the stuff we were fishing in, a trailer hook would have really got us tangled up in some stuff.
Would have made it very, very difficult. What I like to do, Steve, is you notice the difference between these two here is that the short one, the skirt is cut almost equal with the bottom of the hook. And to try to prevent fish from being a short striking like that, I do that routinely. I don't throw a trailer hook that often, but this is kind of like my go-to thing if fish are striking short or anytime, is I will clip that clip the skirt equal with the bottom hook. You know, yours here, kind of that skirt flows pretty long. A fish can come up and strike short at that and can miss it, which is a good reason for the trailer hook.
Right.
But if you can't throw a trailer hook, at the very least, clip the skirt, you know, equal with the bottom of the hook.
Right.
That's a good tip.
Now, another tip for the buzz bait, and I fish a lot bigger water sometimes. You fish a lot of these smaller local lakes, but a lot of times when fish are a little finicky or spooky, the little 1/8 ounce buzz bait doesn't throw as much water, doesn't make as much noise, and still gets the bites.
Right. Just more of a subtle presentation. You can go really slow with it and just crawl it across the surface when those fish are like you said, finicky.
Right. Now also, it's another good tip for people to fish ponds and stuff like that.
Yeah, there's
The smaller
tons.
baits, the smaller buzz baits and stuff, smaller crankbaits will get you a lot more bites.
Absolutely.
Now, we also fish, since it's a weedy lake,
Yeah.
we fish spinnerbaits a good deal today.
Yeah, we threw quite a bit. Again, this is a smaller one, probably only about, you know, maybe an 1/8 ounce or so. This would be something that we'd throw with a spinning rod. You were throwing a larger one with a bait caster, but you know, given the weed situation and the stumps and the lily pads, we really had to stick with weedless baits. A single hook lure that's going to keep the hook from getting hung up, and spinnerbait is right there.
Right. Now the advantage of a lighter spinnerbait like this over a heavy spinnerbait is you can keep this up in the water column a lot easier than say a 1/2 ounce spinnerbait when you only have grass 6 inches from the surface.
And the other thing is the size of the blade or the shape of the blade. You know, a Colorado blade is much, much easier to keep shallow, where the willow leaf blades will tend to sink faster, or you'll have to wind them quicker to keep them shallow. So I like, that's kind of like a tortoiseshell blade. It's kind of an in-between, a compromise between the two. But if you need to keep your baits shallow, that a smaller bait or the bigger blade will really help keep it shallow.
Now, here's the bait that I caught one of my fish on today. Okay, it's a creature bait, brush hog type of bait, baby brush hog. Now, I like this bait fishing around pads, flipping, pitching, and stuff like that. But today we didn't use it so much as a catch bait, but we used it as a comeback bait.
Right. Yeah, we were able to follow up on a couple of strikes. I think the fish you caught today that you're referring to hit a buzz bait and then missed it. And you and I were both able to throw back in there, and you hooked that fish and caught it. So it's a good spot fisher.
Sure.
You know, a clump of pads, a stump, an obvious intersection of two pieces of cover. It's great to flip or pitch that into a spot and fish a spot where you think a fish is. This really isn't designed for like covering large expanses of water quickly. That's not what it's used for. It's used for, we want to fish a spot where we think a fish is there, so let's throw there. Or as you said, as a follow-up bait. You know, when a fish is struck, and you can throw something back in there very quickly, and hopefully you still got that fish that's excited and he'll be willing to bite.
And it's very important in a lake like this that we're at, where the whole lake looks good, you really have to concentrate on those smaller spots and smaller areas.
Right.
You can't run around and fish the whole lake at once. You
Yeah.
have to take your time.
And you need to pay attention. As we were getting bites today, we tried to analyze every time we got a bite. And most every bite we got, the fish were out on the outer edge or of a point
Right.
of larger lily pads.
And that became our pattern.
Right, and so that's what we continue to try to focus, spend our focus in those areas.
Right. Now here's a bait that we throw a lot.
Yeah.
We throw it a ton. I guess everybody calls them Senkos or
Right.
stick worms and stuff like that. You've got it rigged on a weedless hook.
Yeah, that's, I got this from Bob. Bob finally got me stuck on these things. And what I hated when I was fishing them is I was just hooking them right through the center. And every time you'd set the hook on a fish, you'd ruin a worm.
Right.
And so I think I read about this in Bassmaster Magazine, where if you take an O-ring,
That little guy right there.
and
that
I
O-ring.
just go to my little local plumbing supply store with one of my worms to make sure that it's an O-ring that fits really tight over the center of it. And then that's just a 1/0 weedless hook that I buy from Walmart, and hook it through the O-ring. That way you can catch 10, 15, even 20 fish on a single hookup without losing anything. It's another great positional bait,
Right.
a follow-up bait. When we were pitching it to the edge of weeds, or anytime we saw an isolated piece of cover, it's a great bait for that.
Right. Now, we got top waters.
Yeah.
Really, it's number one, it's effective, but it's exciting to
Yeah,
fish.
of course.
And we've got a couple of baits here. First, we got this little torpedo here.
Yeah.
Now, this bait's been around longer than us.
It has, but for some reason, they still bite it. If you can get to an area where you're fishing the edge, or if it's getting a little bit darker and the fish are more active and cruising, you can fish this, and we do it because it's fun, not so
Right.
much because we think it's necessarily the best
Yep.
thing for
It's got
catching them
this-
at that moment.
This little propeller on the
Right.
back of it,
And it
which makes most of the bubbles and stuff
right
behind it.
It makes a good amount of noise as well. Or what we have next.
Well, to me, you're not top water fishing if you're not fishing a popper. I absolutely love to fish poppers, and this popper is probably one of my favorite, and probably one of my favorite colors.
Yeah, that's a great one as well. For some reason, I think these classic lures, people kind of get away from them for a while and almost forget about them. The fish don't.
Oh no, not at all.
And sometimes you pull that bait out of your box, let me try it, and all of a sudden, hey, this bait is still working. It's a dynamite lure. It's really fun to fish, and just exciting. Throw it in there. You can let it sit and just give that thing a pop, and let it sit some more, and give it another pop, as long as you can possibly stand it, until finally a fish will blow up.
Oh yeah,
And it's
yeah.
great.
I've got a friend, Woody. Now, Woody, you know who you are, okay? His tackle box is like archives. He uses all these old baits because nobody sees them. That's another great tip. Baits don't stop working, people stop fishing
People
them.
stop using them.
So if you got a good bait, stick with it.
Right.
Now, we also had this little teeny tiny shallow running bait, almost like a -1 type of deal,
Yeah.
but smaller.
Right, this is a bait made by Storm, but it's very much like a man's 1-. It doesn't go deeper than a foot, and you can crawl it real slow and even have it go less than that. Again, we're dealing with emergent weed growth here, or weeds that have come nearly to the surface. We're not throwing baits that are going to dive 2, 3, Lord, not 4, 5, 6 feet deep.
Right.
You'd never catch anything with it. But something where if you hold your rod tip nice and high, keep the retrieve nice and slow, you can almost wake this like you would a spinner bait. It would just make just a little bitty wake under the water. And you can stop it and it will float up almost like a topwater bait, twitch it, and it will dive right back down again. It can be deadly. I like that chartreuse color. It's like a little perch color. This water was a little bit stained today. It wasn't really muddy, but just had a little color to it. If it was clearer, I might try maybe something a little more natural, but a little bit of chartreuse, I think, is always a safe thing when you're in water that's a little stained.
Now, last but not least,
Right.
and this was number one. It was a lure that located fish for us today,
Right.
but it was also a lure that caught fish for us today.
Right.
And it's pink. Okay, it's pink.
You noticed?
That's it. It's a floating worm. And you
yeah.
know what? This time of year, it's one of my favorite baits in shallow water. Now, it's not a bait for all seasons.
No, I tell you, it's mixed up. I mean, springtime is probably when you're most
Yep.
famous time for fishing the floater worm. You know, you might look at that in a tackle shop and say, who in the world is going to buy that? And, really, we buy these in these colors, the gaudy colors, so that they can be seen easily in the water. Oftentimes, you know, you're looking at the worm coming through the water, and a fish will strike it, and you see the strike long before you feel it, and it gives you the opportunity to set the hook that much quicker.
Right.
Yeah, we were fishing that with no weight at all. There's a little swivel here,
Yep.
that just to keep, you know, if the line from getting twisted up, and it's a great one again through the weeds because it's able to snake through the pads, snake through all the emergent weed growth. But once you get to the edge of the weeds, you can just let it fall. And the swivel gives it just enough weight where it will just sink down ever so slowly.
Because what a lot of people are always told is you always want to rig your worm straight, but that's not necessarily true with the floating worm.
Not necessarily.
If you put a little kink in the worm, it'll tend to dart and corkscrew, and by having the swivel on here, it'll really stop your line from twisting.
You know, the twisted line could end your day. So really, really important, the swivel. It gives you a little bit of casting weight, but it'll save you.
Well, you know, John, I think we've got a few minutes left. We're going to get back out on the water, dump the boat back in, and try to get one more fish, because you know what? It's getting dark and it's prime time.
Perfect time. Let's get out there and do it.
That's it.
Okay?
Well, everybody, that's your tackle box.
I told you I like that floating worm here.
Yep. There we go. Oh, you
Boy,
got
that is
him
a nice
good
one.
too.
Yeah. Oh boy, right in the bottom of the lip.
Right.
Well, Steve, I'm glad you could finally join me in Lake Towhee. I know we've done a couple shows out here, but I'm glad you could finally make it. What do you think of our little lake up here?
Man, that's a nice fish. And hey, if you want to learn more about Lake Towhee, you go to DelawareValleyOutdoors.com. John, I think it's been a good day. I think we're going to wrap it up.
Okay. Well, for Delaware Valley Outdoors, I'm John Hawthorne.
I'm Steve Horvath.
Be sure to check us out on Facebook and on Twitter. And we'll see you on the water.